Last month, a tweet from everybody's favorite socialist New York Congresswoman happened to catch my attention. I realized instantly that the concept did require further engagement, which I granted. But as I was tweeting off the cuff, I came up with an interesting solution to a lot of Congress's issues, and possibly our debt and our tax situation as well. And I'd like to claim that I went into this thread with this thought in mind, but I will admit it was completely inadvertent. But before we get into my idea for how to fix the woes of the government, let's have a look at the tweet that started all of this. On November 24th, New York 14 Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez tweeted this, responding to the president. In response to Trump's tweet, Nancy Pelosi, Adam Schiff, AOC, and the rest of the Democrats are not getting important legislation done, hence the Do-Nothing Democrats, USMCA, National Defense Authorization Act, gun safety, prescription drug prices, and infrastructure are dead in the water because of the Dems. I do apologize for this taking so long because I did some research on it, but the USMCA has now passed, so we have that in front of us. But Cortez responds, in my first 11 months, I've co-sponsored 339 pieces of legislation, authored 15, took on Big Pharma with my colleagues in hearings that brought pre-P generic a year early and exposed abuse of power. In 4 years, you've jailed kids and made corruption the cause celebre. Try to keep up. Initially, when I saw this, I responded asking the Congresswoman how many pieces of her legislation had actually passed, and I thought that that was going to be that. But walking away, I couldn't stop thinking about it, so after a few days, I revisited the idea. On November 27th, I tweeted out, Rep. AOC the other day bragged about how many pieces of legislation she's written as an accomplishment for her being in D.C. While it's an amazing feat of social engineering that she's there in the first place, I wouldn't jump to using the legislation written as a benchmark of legislative success. And with that in mind, I retweeted the remark and asked her how much of her legislation passed. See, that's what we should be focusing on right now, what legislation can actually pass, and with the opposite chamber against her party, a president out of her party, and her authoritarian views unappealing to a series of blue dogs in her own chamber, I'd be willing to bet that none of her legislation has passed. In fact, it's largely akin to a fantasy novel at this point, except fantasy novelists don't get paid until they sell something, and Miss Cortez is comfortably collecting 6 figures of your tax money. It's a problem on both sides of the aisle at this point with our hyper-partisan country, with the exception of a few pieces of legislation like this animal cruelty law. Republicans and Democrats alike are putting up pie-in-the-sky fantasy bills with no attempt to work with the other side to get passage, lest they bend a little bit to the evil other side and face contempt at the ballot box next time at home. And they are getting millions of dollars to do this. While my dream of abolishing the federal government may be too extreme at this point, lawmakers could easily be working together to find solutions and repeal laws, or unfortunately make laws that are actually good for the people, instead of wasting time on bills that have no dream of passage, catering to special interests and a handful of hyperpartisan voters, or maybe make them work flat rate. You only get paid if your bill passes. Buy piecework and rant. Now, I have an associate's degree in automotive repair, and one of the first lessons that anyone who goes to mechanic school learns is that there is a tremendous amount of money that you could make in the field. Some teachers and recruiters definitely oversold that number, but the underlying lesson has always been the same. You definitely make your own salary by a system called flat rate. When an employee works flat rate, the clock hours are essentially ignored. He is instead paid an hourly rate based on the projected time that a series of engineers have decided that a job should take. Let's have a look at some of the examples we have here. Now, of course, I want to take some time and look at some of the larger and the smaller numbers, obviously. Transmission repair and inspection is 8.8 hours on a 3.5 liter four-wheel drive F-150, as you can see. And if you are changing the drive plate on that, it adds zero point 0.2 hours to that. And this is no matter how much time the technician takes on that, whether he takes 10 to 12 hours or whether he can get it done in 5. He still gets paid the same 8.8 hours. And if we look on another sheet here, replacing an exhaust manifold on that same truck, especially the one that doesn't have the turbo, goes for, on warranty time, 2.2 hours, and regular time not under warranty as 3 hours. Once again, no matter how much time the technician takes. Now, on the automotive side, flat rate has been the standard for a very, very long time. It's very rare to see an auto technician that makes a regular hourly wage. And this does two things, of course. This does protect the customer if the technician should take much longer, whether he's straight out of school and doesn't have the experience, or whether he gets stuck up on something. The customer is still protected and still pays the same guaranteed rate that was promised to the customer when he or she came in. But it also gives the technician incentive to work faster and work properly, because he does lose some of his flat rate time if something comes back, because the more of these jobs that he can get throughout the day, the more hours he is going to collect at the end of the week. So it's really a win-win, especially for customers, but also for the technicians. But of course, we're not talking about automotives on this show. We are talking about Congress. So let's have a look at how this actually relates to Congress and how we could use this to our benefit in the government. Now, most of us in the country know that the posted salary for both chambers of Congress is $174,000 a year, especially those of us who are politically minded. And this is a very generous salary, especially to those of us who live in the middle of the country. And yet Congress spent a portion of 2019's fiscal year demanding a raise. And the American public made no secret of the fact that they didn't see enough results from the legislature in both chambers to warrant such a raise, which brings us back to the argument from Cortez. Now, A was to have co-sponsored 339 pieces of legislation and penned 15 of her own, yet none of them have any dream of Senate passage, and even less likely to pass the executive branch across Donald Trump's desk. Yet Cortez, along with everybody in Congress, is being paid to gridlock legislatively and investigate each other with no results. Now, every week we see more and more bills coming out of both chambers that are getting more extreme, such as the Green New Deal, and there are no real repercussions for Democrats and Republicans to refuse to work together. And I think it's time to hold them accountable for that and for the fact that they are getting such a massive salary. And the way to do that may be fiscally at this point, and my proposal to do so is that Congress must work flat rate. What I mean, of course, is that congressmen only get paid if a bill should pass. Now, this is the most extreme case, of course, and I do understand the fact that people do need to eat, and I definitely don't want any more federal laws. So, like flat rate, we can tier out the system in many ways. And an example of this would be co-sponsoring a bill gets the lowest tier, gets the lowest amount of rate for the piecework. Actually writing a bill gets a little bit higher tier, of course. And of course, there are other steps up to passage. A bill passing the chamber of the author gets a bonus for everybody co-sponsoring that particular bill. And a passage by the opposite chamber, I would give a pay bump to both chambers for that point. And finally, if the bill is palatable enough that it could get to the president and get signed and go over to the Supreme Court to see if it's constitutional or not, well, I think that should give a bonus to everybody who was involved in writing, co-sponsoring the bill, and making sure that it gets passed. And of course, since I do want to see many more of the federal laws go away, I think we should offer a bonus and incentive if the resolution or bill repeals a current law on the books. This seems like a really good idea on paper, and a lot of people might think that maybe we should have thought of this before, but this is really a proposal that could only be attempted now in the internet age, especially with so much of the country as politically active as it is. Without up-to-the-second internet news coverage, there is nothing to let the people know that their representatives signed on to an extremist or unpopular bill just to make sure they got that quick payday. But now we know instantly and can hold representatives or senators responsible at the ballot box the next time around. This is also an idea that really only works under a divided government, and it may actually prove dangerous as well if the government were to unify behind a single party, especially if there were supermajorities in both chambers by one particular party. But an advantage to our political division in this country is that this would be difficult to impossible to achieve right now, and in fact may take a major event to ever be considered. There may be no real way to pull both parties back to the center, but right now I think this may be the closest try to get them to start working together, because if they don't work together, they don't get paid. What do you think about congressional salaries, and do you have any other proposals to try and pull representatives and senators together to start working together again? I always welcome thoughtful and positive discussion in the comment section below, and especially over on Twitter, that is at EdsBlogTwitter with a 1 in place of the I. Thanks as always for listening to this show and supporting this channel. And remember, never take the words of bloggers, podcasters, or journalists as gospel. Find all the facts and draw your own conclusions. Take care.